Welcome to our home. Roy would like to tell a story of when he went to find his brother in the Philippines.
In 1944, when I was 17 years old, I joined the Merchant Marine and had taken a voyage and come back. And during that time, the security was real tight, and when the ship sailed, we didn't know where we were going. And when we come into port, well, one of my shipmates had a girlfriend that worked for the shipping company, and she said that the next cargo would be going to the Philippines. So when I got home, I talked to my mom and dad, and I said, I think I'm going to stay on this ship for another voyage so I can go see John. And of course, I could get off and stay home for a week or two if I wanted to and take another ship. But anyway, I told my mom and dad, I think I'll stay on and go see if I can find John. And he'd been in the Army and over in the islands since 1942. So it had been quite a long time since we'd seen him, and he was my only brother. So my dad says, there ain't a chance in a million you seeing your brother, or seeing John. So Mom looked me right straight in the eye, and she says, you'll see him. She had a straight communication with the Lord, I'm sure. So I took the trip and signed on, and we went to sea and stopped a while in Pearl Harbor for some supplies and stuff on the ship. And 33 days after we left, we pulled into Subic Bay on the island of Luzon. So our ship was loaded in such a way that they could build a dock from the cargo we took from Tacoma. When we left there, one of the stevedores said that was the heaviest load they ever put on a Liberty ship to date going out of Tacoma. But what I didn't know, we didn't just come there and unload. We came there and they started building the dock using our ship for a warehouse. And so we got to stay there quite a while. In fact, we were there 85 days all told. But everybody that come on board, I'd ask where the 37th Division was. Nobody knew. A lot of time had gone by. And finally one day, a Filipino came aboard, and he had an armband on that said, interpreter. So I talked to him, and he didn't like he didn't understand my English, and I didn't understand his. But I sat down, gave him something to eat, and we talked, and finally we got to understanding each other a little bit. Oh, he says, the 37th, they're at 37th Division are at Baguio, and that was on northern Luzon. So I'd had it set up with my chief steward. He was my boss. We had one of the Navy Armed Guard. We had 15 Navy men that manned our guns, and so he was one of the armed guard. He liked cooking and stuff, and so he hung around. He knew what I was doing, so he was going to take my place while I was gone. So he covered up for me, and I left. And when I got ashore, I took a boat ashore, and it was just right out in the boondocks, you know. And so I just started walking north on this little country road, and here come a big dump truck come along, the first ride I got. And there was a little bitty Filipino in this great big off-the-road type Army dump truck. And I got in, and he just looked so small, sitting up there in that big truck, and I got in with him, and he starts pulling it into gear, and he couldn't get it in. And I noticed he had the clutch about halfway down, so I pointed at that, and oh, he nodded and smiled, and he scooted over and shoved it clear to the floor and got it in gear. And pretty soon I didn't know whether I ought to be riding with him or not, you know. And we come to a place where there was a big log that had been split in two going across a creek, and it was quite a little ways down to the creek. And so he scooted way over and looking out the side of the truck at the front wheel. And I'm looking out the other side, and he got it across there all right. But I rode along with him a few miles, and then he had to turn off. So I got out and started walking again. And hadn't walked too far till I run into a kid riding a caribou, and he offered me a ride. You know, he was patting the back end of the caribou saying, "Caribou, hooey, hooey." But I could walk faster than he could go. So anyway, I got several rides from different Army rigs. They didn't pass anybody up if you were walking. And finally I got a ride in a real car. It was a Filipino in a 41 Chevrolet. That was about the newest car you could get in those days. And well, he'd bought it new. He told me about it. You know, he paid 20,000 pesos for it. And that's about $10,000 American. And it was sold for about 700 here in the U.S. too. But anyway, that was an interesting story he told me. And he owned a nightclub in Manila. And I suppose he catered to the Japanese like he was catered to the Americans now. But he told me how to get to Baguio. And when he got to the road that turned off towards Manila, well, I left and I started walking again. And then Army lieutenant picked me up in a Jeep. And I told him my story. I said, going to look for my brother, you know. Oh, he says the 37th isn't at Baguio. And my heart kind of dropped right there. He says, but I know who does know. He says, you just stick with me. So we went on several more miles, and then he turned to the right up a road. It looks like a logging road here with grass growing in the middle of it. And we went miles and miles back in there. And I was hoping he knew what he was doing, because I didn't want to have to walk all the way back out of there. But we stopped at a little house, just one house out, the first one, the only one they saw. And went inside, and there was a full bird colonel there he introduced me to. And he set me down like, you know, he was very cordial, got me a cup of water, and visited a while. I guess he wanted to know whether I was real. You know, I'm a long ways away for somebody wearing sailor dungarees. So after he figured I wasn't a spy or something, I think, well, he got the war maps out and showed me where the 37th Division headquarters was. And he says, now if you start walking here, there's a little town of San Jose. You can make it before 6 o'clock tonight. And he says, there's a convoy going to go over the mountain and back in where they were. And you catch that convoy, they'll ride with them. So I started walking. And I finally come to a place, to the top of a hill. I looked down over this valley, and there's a big, beautiful meadow here, and there's a road coming in from the right I was on, and another road coming in from the left, and down in the middle of this valley, they made a big Y, you know. And I got down clear in the middle of this meadow, and from the other road, from to the left, here comes a Japanese Army truck, and had about 8 or 10 guys on it. I can't remember, and they had all the Japanese markings on it, and I didn't know just what to do, so I just kept walking, you know. And they pulled up alongside and beckoned me to get in. I go on, and they becked me to get in. And so one of the Filipinos knew a little English, and he says, "We're guerrillas," and he says, "We're mopping up after the Americans, you know, for the Japanese, picking up the Japanese if they find any." And I don't know whether they tell me the truth or not, but he says, we get a bounty for the left ear of every Japanese they killed, you know. And so anyway, we stayed with them until they got to San Jose. And here was this convoy, like the colonel had said. And I'd say there was probably 20 trucks. I didn't count them, but every truck was tied together with the winch on one of them, the cable hooked to the trailer hitch on the one in front of it. And I wondered why that was, but I found out later. But anyway, I asked one of the truckers for if I could ride with him. He had a load looked like I could get on top of, and yeah, he said, you can come along. So I threw my bag in the cab, and there was two Army guys in the truck. So just right about 6 o'clock exactly, they pulled out, and we headed out towards the mountains. And it got dark, and we're still on top there, and it gets chilly in the Philippines even when it gets dark. My coat was down in the cab. And so we came to a place finally where there was a bridge blown out, and the first truck turned down into the creek bottom. It was probably 60 to 100 feet down to this creek. And first truck went over, and the second truck's holding it back with that cable. Anyway, we go down to the bottom of the creek, and just drove right up the creek like it was a road. But with all these trucks tied together, somebody always had traction. And sometimes the truck behind us would be pushing us, and then we'd be pulling them. And I looked down there in the moonlight, and the front axle of that truck was plowing a big furrow in the mud, you know. But we kept rolling, and up the road a piece, we finally, the highway was close to the road again, and the first truck went up, and we got back on the road. Went on till about 10 o'clock at night, and we stopped at a little camp, and it wasn't very brightly lit, but our truck was cutting out, and the engine would stop and then start again. He said, so I come climbing down off the truck, and those guys forgot I was there, and they apologized because I could have slipped over the side and got in the cab when it got chilly. But we stopped there, and it was just a camp of guys, and they laying around on blankets with the candlelight and playing poker with money like I had never seen. They had been through the financial district in Manila when they took Manila, and they had 50s and 100s and playing poker with them. But there's no place to spend it. But one of the soldiers there gave me his mess kit, and we had some beans or something. I can't remember what we ate, and some of those dog biscuits like they give them. And we had something to eat, and we were supposed to fix our truck while we were eating. So when we got ready to go, we got in the truck, and what they did was replaced our truck with another one. They took our load off and put it on another truck and put it in the line. Well, here my bag wasn't there that I had, a little satchel. It had a few things in it. I don't remember what was in it even. But I couldn't ask them to stop while I went and looked for that other truck because everything was dark. I mean, I don't know how big the facility was we stopped at or anything, but we left there driving by moonlight, no lights. And we went on till just about daybreak. These guys had talked all night about, they'd volunteered to take this trucking job so they could eat when they got to the 37th headquarters, because they had real food there, you know. So they'd volunteered to do this. So they've talked most of the night about what we were going to have for breakfast, you know. So anyway, about daybreak, we stopped at a wide spot in the road, and they said there's a convoy coming the other way, so we had to stop in this place while we passed because it was just a one-way road. So the truckers, like all truckers, they get out talking to one another, and we're stretching our legs and getting some coffee. And the guy across from us says, "What you got on?" He says, "30 caliber." He says, "What you got?" He says, "Bodies." And all at once, you know, the reality of war kind of set in. And I was just barely light enough sea, and I'm looking these load over, and they had these wooden boxes with stenciled on the guy's name, rank, and serial number on it, you know. And I looked them all over. I didn't see my brother's name on it. And so we got back in. We went on till about 8 o'clock in the morning. We got to 37th headquarters, and we got that breakfast. The pancakes were cold and curled up, and the eggs had been cooked in a bake sheet in the oven, but the bacon was really good. But these guys larped that down like it was the very best thing they'd ever had. And me being on the ship, we had the best of everything, you know. But I didn't complain. I was hungry too. And so after we had breakfast, we said our goodbyes, and I thanked them for the ride and the entertainment all night, and went over to the headquarters tent. And I thought, now it's all downhill from here, you know. They would not tell me anything. They just completely ignored me, you know. So I thought, well, I came from that way, the war must be that way. So I kept walking. And I got up the road a mile or so, and here comes a Jeep, two MPs in it. And I thought, well, maybe this is the end of the road. But I told him my story. I was looking for my brother. Oh, yeah, he said, they're supposed to have R&R. He says, this road here about maybe 20 miles or so. And there'd be little signs that's made of, they use the symbols on playing cards, like clubs and hearts and diamonds and stuff, different combinations to tell who's where, you know. So they give me the code to find where they'd be in there's rest and relaxation place, you know. So we came to that place. I got a ride with this one vehicle after they picked me up. In fact, the only one I saw, it was a tanker truck, tanker of water. And when we got to the road that went back to where my brother was supposed to be, well, they let me off, and it was probably a couple of miles anyway back there, maybe more. Seemed like forever getting there. But I got there, it was Company B, Company C, no Company A. So I'm asking around this. They said, no, they're supposed to be here, but they may be back farther up where the war was going on. Anyway, they told me how to get there, back to the main road. I could probably get a ride. And here come a Army 6x6 along loaded with oil drums. So they stopped, and I told him where I was going. And well, he says, they should be right where you come from. He says, but they may be hung up here. You never know. He says, so you just stick with me. He says, when we get, I'm going to drop you off to some people that will know, and then I'll be back in about 45 minutes up the road. So he dropped me off, and had machine gun or BARs in this hole. A couple of guys in there. They were watching this road to make sure nobody crossed it that wasn't supposed to, I guess. And I told them I was looking for Company A. Yeah, there should be right back where you came from. So we sat there, and it was like the first day of hunting season here. You hear tut, 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 and zing, zing, you know, shells going off. And they were all dug in. So in about 45 minutes, just like the man said, here come the truck. And he says, take it on the fly. He told me, he didn't stop. I had to jump off when he says, take it on the fly. So there was two guys in the cab then, so I had to jump up on the back. And as I jumped in, my feet went out from under me, and there was about 1/8 of an inch of oil all over the back of that truck. One of those barrels must have leaked, or maybe it got a bullet hole in it or something. But anyway, I fell right flat on my back, and I had oil from the top of my head to my heels. And the driver's hollering, "Keep low," he says. So I rolled over, crawled up in behind the sideboards, so they couldn't see me. And so we got back to where that road was again to get back up to the R&R place. And I got off and walked in. And there was Company B, Company C, no Company A. And they got the same story. Well, they supposed to be here. But anyway, I bummed a can of beans in. It was getting long in the afternoon, and I'd been up all day and all night, and I was getting hungry. And in fact, I was almost sick, for some reason or other. But I ate those beans and sat down under a tree. And a couple hours later, I woke up. I'd gone to sleep. And when I woke up, the first thing I saw was a little shack over there that had an aerial sticking out of it that wasn't there when I was there before. So I walked over there, and there's a soldier there, and I said, well, I figured that was communications. And I told him I was looking for my brother and in Company A. But the thing is, they moved in while I was sleeping. He says, who are you looking for? I said, Sergeant John Gault. He says, Johnny? He looks around, he says, right there. He was probably 200 feet from where I was sleeping when they moved in. And I walked over there and grabbed him by the shoulder, and he made some kind of an exclamation mark point that I wouldn't want to say. And he sat up, and he didn't know his little brother was even in the Pacific, let alone going to drop in on him, So come to find out, John was in charge of the company. They'd lost their lieutenant just a short time before that. So he showed me around, introduced me to a bunch of guys, and we talked and visited. He saw that I was all in need of a bath after having that oil all over me. So anyway, when he looked me over, he says, you mean you're all the way up here, he says, without even a sidearm? He said, and anyway, he fixed me up with some clean clothes and a 45. So I had a sidearm. And anyway, we all went down to the river and took a bath. And he told me he's going to send my clothes to the laundry. And I'm just wondering where the laundry was or who's going to wash them clothes. And when we were swimming, we looked down the river, ways down the river, and there was women washing clothes in the river, beating the clothes with a stick on the rock. And I said, well, that's better than nothing, I thought. And when the clothes come back, they had everybody had their clothes washed. When they come back, they looked like they'd come right out of the laundry. They were just clean and dry. Got them back the next day. But they were supposed to have 2 or 3 weeks there on rest. And I thought we'd have a really good little vacation out here. And 3 days later, they had to go back onto the front lines. So I had a pretty short visit, but I'm getting ahead of myself. We heard lots of stories, and they got their first beer that they'd had in quite some time, and John paid for it all. They all got 3 cans apiece, but he paid for it all. Of course, they had been through the walled cities too, in the financial district in Manila. They had all gobs of money too. But I got to hear lots of stories from the different guys in the camp. But the one that stuck out in my memory more than anything else was a shirt John had. He says, I got something I wanted to show you. And he got this shirt out of his duffel bag, and it had 5 bullet holes in the back. And he says, I was wearing this when this happened. And they were advancing on a machine gun emplacement, and John was running from one point of cover to another, and while he's running, a he caught his foot on a root and it slammed him right flat on his face, and his shirt was billowed out behind him as he went down. But he said he hit the ground, and he says, I knew I was dead. He says nobody could miss with that close a range. And he said he just laid there, he peeking out of his eye, opened a crack watching, trying to keep from breathing too much, so they knew he was dead. But he just laid there and laid there. He said it took forever, it seemed like. Finally caught them all looking the other way. He reached down and grabbed a hand grenade and dropped it on him and got out of there. But anyway, that was the one story that stood out the most. But they were supposed to be there about 3 weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, but they got 3 days. But I was able to be there the whole time. And it was nice to watch them get ready for battle. It wasn't quite like you'd thought it was. They'd take a little pack and they'd fill it half full of ammunition and half full of food, and the rifle in their hands, and they left. They were gone hunting. So anyway, they went one way and I went the other. But on the way in, I'd seen an airplane landing. Back off the road, I went in amongst the trees, and it had one of those little signs on it, like with the coded sign. And I remembered that, so when I'm walking back, I walked back in where this airplane, there was an airplane in there, just one, and one guy. And I says, you guys going back to Clark Field? And that was only about 30 miles from the ship, you know. And yeah, he says, I asked him if I'd ride along. Sure. He says, I got to put a tire on the back of this before we go. And I said, where are you going to get a tire here? Oh, he says, you just come with me. And he loaded me down with some tools, and we walked down to the end of the runway and then out through the trees, and here was another airplane just like it. It didn't make it out of there, and it was, back wheel was just about a foot off the ground. It was a real simple job. We unbolted the whole assembly and took it over to the one he had jacked up over there and bolted it back on. About the time we got done, the pilot and co-pilot showed up, and 2 or 3 other guys, maybe 4 other guys. I can't remember exactly, but they were all going back to Clark Field. So they tied onto the back of that airplane with a truck and drug it right back where the wings were just right back against the trees. And they sat there warming them engines up, and pretty soon they were just screaming. And I don't know what they did, but they probably cut us loose back there, and we started down the runway. And I'm looking at these trees. And the guy was able to jerk it up off of there, and I swear I could feel those trees brushing under the plane as we went across them, and then went down a valley towards I don't know where, but anyway, it went down this nice little valley. It got their flying speed up. One of the guys, one of the soldiers that was on the plane, he was just like a tour guide. He was telling me about this, that, and the other thing as we went down. And before we got to Manila, in that area, there was just miles of rice paddies. And there was airplanes all over those paddies. Just about, I'd say 3 or 4 to 1 Japanese planes on the ground. That there must have been a lot of dog fighting going on coming in there, but while they were taking the island. But anyway, we landed back at Clark Field. I hitchhiked a ride, several rides when I got back to the ship, and caught the workboat back out to the ship, and the captain was waiting at the gate at the gangway when I come on. And of course, he saw everybody that come and left. We're anchored out all the time. Boy, he lit into me for deserting my post. I'm logging you 2 days for one, he says, for you being gone. It taking 2 days' pay away from me for every day I was gone. I said, that's fine. I said, that's good. He said, and I just let him know that was fair. But he didn't know how to take that, and he just kept bawling me out, you know. And finally, I went in, and it was just about time to start supper, and I went right back to work. And I was telling the chief steward about how the captain had lit into me for being gone. He says, he ain't got no right to do that. His guys go up to Manila, get drunk, and he's never logged one of them. And so anyway, before I was finished that night, one of the guys come down and said the captain wanted to see me up in his forecastle. So I come up there, and he was just nice as pie when I come in, and wanted to know what I done, how my trip went, and all that, and even apologized to me for really being hard on me, you know. So, unbeknownst to me, that the chief steward had gone up and talked to him. He said, to let him know that was an honorable thing to go see his brother, and the captain wanted me to tell him the same story I told you, and nearabouts. So everything went all right that way. But we were still there another month or so. I can't remember I don't remember just what the time, because we couldn't keep a diary. It's one thing you didn't do, because if you were captured, they didn't want you to know anything. So anyway, while we were still there, they dropped the bomb on Japan, and the war was over, and we still had about maybe a week more to be there. So other ships came along, so destroyers mostly, and took some of our nice Tacoma water that we had, and because we were going to be there a while, and they were leaving for Japan now, you know, and so we pumped just about all of our water off, and we were just probably from here across the lake, maybe half a mile, you know, from the water dock, from the water source that we could take on water before we left. Only thing is, the day before we got ready to leave, there's some of the Japanese didn't know the war was over, and they blew up the water source. So we left there without water. We had saltwater showers, and we had enough drinking water, good fresh drinking water. But then we went over to the island of Leyte, and there was a water dock there, and we hooked on for about 2 hours on a 3-inch line they had running in. So we had water to get, we were headed home, we was headed back home. So we were almost to San Francisco, where we were headed, when they radioed us to return to Pearl Harbor and reload. And so after hauling all this war material, we could pull in there, and we had a full load of Schlitz, Blatz, and Pabst Blue Ribbon, and cigarettes. A whole load of beer and cigarettes to go to Japan. So anyway, I got to see how the people lived there. It was really, they were really, really in bad shape. The stevedores coming on to unload the ship were taking their fingers inside our garbage cans and eating the bacon grease and coffee crumbs, coffee grounds that was in there. I mean, it was gross. But these guys were hungry. They were working hard. And come noontime, I noticed they fed them a little box like you put berries in a crate of rice. That was lunch. And I just know how those guys were getting by on that. But then I walked uptown and saw several of them fighting over horse manure, because a horse did his job, and they had the parking strips planted with vegetables and things. And anyway, they really had it tough in that war. And anyway, we returned back when we were home, and we came up the Columbia River this time. And I just almost cried looking at the white farmhouses and all the good things we have. And those people are really, really hurting. But anyway, by the time I got home, it was within a short time. I can't remember whether John got there first or I got there first. But he came home, and my dad's twin brother had two boys our age. And they both, one was in the Navy, he came home, and one in the Air Force came home. So I signed off that ship, and we spent a little time before I went back to sea again. And I probably was home a couple of weeks or so. And then I signed on the Cape Victory and went. But anyway, when I got back, Dad was talking to my dad, and he says, "Your mom fasted one day a week and prayed for John all the time he was gone." It was about 3.5 years. And so I got to thinking about this later. I got to how things come together. I heard this rumor about this ship going to the Philippines. And then I talked to my mother and Dad, and they said, yeah. Then we took a cargo that took 85 days to unload. And we're there waiting all this time. And finally, this one person came aboard that told me that they were at Baguio, which wasn't where they were, but it worked all right. And when I found my brother, it was the only 3 days I could have seen him in that whole time. And then we all came home safe. And I lay it to my mother's prayers that saw us through that. So I guess that's the end of the story. Well, I hope you enjoyed the story, and I know this couldn't happen without my mother's prayers.